Boom, we're live and recording. And if I've got everything right, this is going across, well, if I've got everything right, Katrina's got everything right and set up, we're across Crowdcast, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter as well, and Facebook, I think. So, hey, everyone, welcome to Hear the People. I'm Glenn Martin, founder and CEO of Nevermind the Job Spec. I am joined this week by my glamorous co-host, Debi Easterday. Introduce yourself, Debi.
I'm Debi Easterday. I am the CEO and Chief Human to Business Matchmaker for H2B, stands for Human to Business Consulting. I'm over in the U.S. We work across the U.S., primarily in healthcare and IT. Big shoes to fill, Katrina. I'll do my best, but happy to be here and stoked to meet Leah this morning too. So,
man, yeah. So we're building to that. Just as a note, FYI, everyone, LinkedIn profiles in the chat channel if you want to connect with Debi and our awesome guest, Leah Ellis, who is currently in Tenerife in Spain. Look at the backdrop, everyone. Welcome, Leah. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So, Leah, founder of Candid People, tell us more.
Sure. I don't know how to follow both of your energy, actually, so I'm going to try. I'm going to try and like pretend I've had coffee and go for it.
I do.
And I'm sorry for this backdrop. I would recommend spending a month working from anywhere, the Canaries, wherever, puts a smile on your face. It's hard, but it's good. So I'm Leah, as Glenn said, founder of Candid People. Candid People is it's really designed to help kind of startups, founders in that first stage of growth. So too often, either the people agenda gets ignored, or we hire in someone on a full-time basis and they end up in the nicest possible way, organizing lunch for people, because that is part of the people agenda. Yeah. So what Candid People is there to do is to help people start thinking about the people agenda. And by that, I mean recruitment, onboarding, performance management, culture, every bit of the employee journey. And to help them start thinking about it before they suddenly get an investment from Series A, before they suddenly want to start hiring, and it's too late to kind of reverse some of the things that have become norms so far. So it's to help people be a bit proactive when it comes to people without that big salary, I guess, of having a C-suite member of the team, which is what we're going to talk about today.
100%. And thanks for the intro, Leah. I mean, it's kind of one of those things, your journey, your personal journey to kind of setting up Candid People is super interesting, because you've worked with a number of startups and scale-ups, and so it's not as if you're kind of commenting on something you've observed. You've been through this journey on numerous occasions. So you have lived experience of those really great decisions, but equally those ones that you kind of think back on and think, should we have really done that in hindsight? But as we said, we'll come to that in terms of why the C-suite hires. Just as a quick kind of housekeeping pointer for everyone, if you are popping questions into LinkedIn, we will try and get to them, but we don't get notified immediately. So apologies if there's a slight delay. If you want to spin over to Crowdcast, you can drop all of your questions for Leah in the chat channel very quickly. We can see them immediately in real time. So just as a kind of pointer for everyone. So thinking about, and actually one thing I was going to say, Leah, we'll get to your backdrop and where you are and how you're thinking around kind of working from different locations, because I think that's super interesting. But to kick us off in terms of the actual subject of the show, why C-suite hires shouldn't be the first. And I'm sure there are probably some founders, co-founders, C-suite individuals going, what does she mean? Right. Why they shouldn't be the first? So just kind of give us a bit of context.
We were just talking about it. Yeah, before in the green room, we were just talking about how this is the big question for every founder, startup owner that I know. So when I saw the just the episode title, I was like, where was this show, 5 years ago? But I'm excited about it. I think it's a question so many people want answered. I think they're going to be shocked by the title, because everyone thinks that organogram starts with the C. So, I think this is fantastic info. Take it away.
Yeah. So yeah, give us some context on this one, Leah. How did your thinking evolve around making such a bold statement?
Yeah, of course. And it is a bold statement. And I'm sure some people say, Leah, what land are you living on? But this is based on my experience and from talking to others in this kind of environment in the startup to scale up space. So I think the first thing to say is founders and that kind of first 20 people in a business, they're unique. And I mean that in a good way. The kind of skill set and kind of character and tenacity and just who you are is so specific to make that successful. And that first kind of 20 people, you probably don't even think about job titles. It is probably someone with a great idea who hires his friends who do some of the stuff, but we're not entirely sure. And they become experts in the business, but they also are, in the nicest possible way, typically generalists. They don't have that specialist kind of experience in one topic area, but the problem happens, they'll roll up their sleeves and they'll get involved. They will help, try to find the solution in the best way they can. And probably the place that sums this up much better than I am doing now is in Ben Francis's podcast on the Diary of a CEO. So if you haven't if you haven't listened to that podcast, I would recommend it. Ben Francis is the founder of Gymshark, and he really talks about in the early days how the skill set and what he needed to be as a founder was entirely different to 15 years down the line now as a CEO. He's gone back as that. So what I'm saying there is not that C-suite hires shouldn't be hired, but that actually I think there's two risks of hiring a C-suite person three at a very early stage. One, the business isn't ready for them yet. The business is still very generic, it is still messy, it's still scrappy, and they are used to owning this certain area, exactly structure. You're nodding
some sort of framework.
Having 5 team members that will do something for them, whereas actually if the business isn't ready for that person yet, they're probably going to be wasted in the nicest possible way. Their kind of skill and experience isn't what is needed yet. The second bit is that the company doesn't actually have the money to hire in that kind of C-suite level person that brings that additional experience. And then we either hire people in who are not a C-suite, but we give them an inflated title, which then leads to problems down the road, because then you realize, actually, I need a CFO. What I have right now is a finance manager. I actually need a strong CFO, but I've already got a CFO. Now what do I do? So that leads to kind of some bad people debt and challenges along the line. And I think thirdly, it is that piece around that kind of attitude and what they enjoy and the business environment that they're going to thrive in. That C-suite person is typically that 200 plus size company where there are some processes in place, whereas at that early stage it is that complete different skill set that I said about. So controversially, I don't think a C-suite person should be that first hire. Whether you choose to get someone to mentor you, or I think we've all probably on this call connected with people who are perhaps C-suite to help us develop and to handle situations that we've not come across yet. I'm not saying don't have that support, but don't hire people too early. Don't hire the wrong people into those positions, and remember kind of the skill set you need at that time.
And I think that people they want to hire someone who knows more than they do. They want to hire someone who, when they get stuck, will bail them out, right? And so I think that that's the reason that people gravitate toward, I'm going to get this really slick person over here. She was the CEO of this major corporation, so she's surely going to be able to understand all of the... No, this is totally different than an enterprise level corporation with silos and teams and structured functional experts overseeing everything. You've got a little whirlwind of a mess that you've created. You want someone to come sense of it all and then grow it and make it bigger. And so I understand why they do it. I don't think that startup founders remember, though, that you can tap into that expertise on a fractional basis. You can hire a fractional CEO to come in and teach you how to set up QuickBooks and teach you how to do forecasting and teach you all of the things that you hear other founders talking about, but you don't know what they're talking about. So you better hire someone that does. And there are now like really fantastic companies that are set up on a subscription basis for fractional CFOs and fractional CHROs. And I mean, tap into that, plug and play as I need them. I've got them sitting over here for $200 a month, whatever it is, retained. Tap into them when you need them instead of bringing in $150,000 resource, which all in after benefits, 401k, that's going to be a $200,000 all in, and that's going to close your doors.
401k, I'm just getting my head around this. A whole different language, the US healthcare.
Well, you look at you pay someone $150,000, but I'm like, okay, well, that's just their base salary. That doesn't even take into consideration what you pay into their benefits, their 401k, if you've got that, any accessory benefits. I mean, it's the all in that you're looking at. You likely can't afford it.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Go on, Leah. Go on.
Such a drain.
No, I was just going to say on that, to Debbie's point around, I want someone who knows more than me. I want them to come in. I think Glenn is going to probably laugh here and smiling to himself. But I think the problem sometimes is too that what is that person with more experience? What do they look like? You think you need this, but you actually don't know at all. And there is the fear of bringing someone in at that point without kind of good consultation, who you think, well, they've I don't know, they've gone through an IPO, therefore they must be right for this business. Let's bring them in. Actually, it's not the skill set that's really going to help you, but you're kind of blinded by their experience and the companies they've worked at. And that kind of sways your decision making. So I think working with those kind of fractional people, as you say, and understanding what works, what doesn't, can help you with that hire when it comes to it.
Definitely. There's a couple of pieces in there, and I think you're right, Leah. We're having, kind of in that startup space, sometimes the kind of C-suite hire is often somebody that's referred to the that either founder or co-founders typically. And they don't tend to go through a normal kind of recruitment process. It's more a series of conversations that then kind of end up being, a kind of mutual agreement for that person to join the business. And perhaps, and it has been proven that what you see there is there's a business alignment, there's a mindset alignment, there's definitely an ambition alignment, but is there a capability alignment in terms of actually have the founder, co-founders really articulated what they want? And have they assessed that in the individual they want to bring in as another C-suite hire? And to your point, which I thought was super spot on, it's that kind of people debt in terms of then you start to accumulate these individuals that if you think about the next evolution of the business, the next growth stage, are they relevant for that stage? And then ultimately, what do you do with them? And I was wondering whether, what your view was on that.
Yeah, and I think that's where, and not to go back to this Ben Francis podcast because I'm not his biggest fan, but I think he just articulates it really well. He says, you have to be prepared. If you bring friends in, you have to be prepared to say to friends, look, it's time for you to go. As long as you're doing that to yourself as well and saying, am I the right person for the role I'm doing right now? So you're not being hypocritical. You need to be prepared to say, look, this is the business I've got to think of. And this conversation is business, not based on friendships. And I have seen it where, those personal relationships end up leading to probably bad business decisions where people stay longer than they should have done, or don't have the skill set to be effective in that role, and the conversation is being avoided because it's a difficult one. So I think actually, yes, in the early stage, you are looking for those people that your network, who can come in, who can join us, but don't just be mindful that what you need right there and then isn't what you're going to need in 6 months, in 12 months, in 18 months. So don't make a decision that's going to be very hard to overturn in that time, or compromise any relationship that you have and not be prepared for that.
And I think it's the trust factor, right? That's why we gravitate toward people we know, because we already know. Look, hiring off the street, you cross your fingers and you hope you can trust that person. You hope they're telling the truth. You hope they show up if they're remote. You hope, and then, but over here is my tried and true ride or die, who's been at my side, who's bailed me out 15, 20 years. I've counted on this woman. She's in, because I can train her up on the rest, and I know I can trust her. But I feel like that's the thing. Trusting somebody on a personal level does not always translate to this being a mutually beneficial professional working relationship. And made the mistake several times. So I can tell you, I get why people do it. You want someone you trust. And I think that so many times you're operating out of fear, and there's no one else in the room that knows more than you do. And there's no one who's got answers, and it's just you. So, you're like trying to patch holes. I don't know anything about marketing. I need a marketing specialist. I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about how to read these, fancy legal MSAs that have just been placed in my inbox. So I need legal counsel, and it's just, you're just patching holes. There's a skills gap. I need a person, but you don't always, you need some advice. You might need to pay someone $500 to sit down with you for an hour. That's
an interesting one. So Leah, have you got some thoughts on how, when these kind of founders, co-founders are thinking about, kind of mapping out those first hires, is there a particular kind of process or approach that you would kind of advise them to start with? Just get that ball rolling in terms of thinking about that, as opposed to just immediately, I need a CFO.
Yeah, you put me on the spot there, Glenn. But no, I think I think what happens is, starting a business, and hats off to all the founders out there, because I definitely, for one, find that bit quite hard actually. But having that passion and kind of dedication to just keep going, like, hats off. And there's a million things that you need to think about. So your hiring plan is just one of them. And you'll probably get to a bit that all of a sudden your business has outgrown the 5 people that are doing everything in the business. And you think, I just need more people. I need them now. And, it's that reactionary hire. So even if, as part of your business planning, right at the early stages where you think, okay, what does this look like? Actually having a people thought as part of that, to say, right, okay, and if this happens, what will we need in place to support that? And it can be a what if at this point. It's not this is our definite hiring plan, but okay, if this scale happens, then what additional resource do we need? What extra skill set do we need that we don't have in the business? Go and speak to a few people. Other founders love to share their experience, your network, whatever. What would you suggest, so that you, at the point of the time where you want to start recruiting, you've already thought about it a little bit, and you've thought about those other options. And one thing I would say is, in that early stage, and I'm talking kind of the first 4 years probably, to try and stop making those permanent decisions that are then harder to reverse and probably need a HR conversation around. look for more temporary things, so like a fixed term contract, or look for a fractional person, like we're saying, like a mentor, or 1 day a week, whatever it is, so that you do have that flexibility. But I think that first point is, okay, where is the business going? What type of people do we need to help us get to that point? And I think the final bit is, as a founder, what skills do I have? What are my strengths? What are the things that I can bring to this business? And what is it that I'm missing? And, when is that going to become a challenge? Me, for example, detail and finance would be my area of, challenge. Let's put it that way. So at what point is that going to become a problem for me? And at what point am I going to need support? And I think, whilst I'm saying don't hire C-suites, I do think the most successful startups are typically the people that bring in that person with the right experience at the right time. So if I think of Good Lord, where I used to work, I actually think William coming in as CEO when he did, sort of 5-6 years into the business's journey, and coming in with experience of growing a business of that size, and with the experience of focusing a business and all of that, that was really needed. But the founders recognized that, and it was a mutual decision. So yeah, I'm being slightly contradictory there, but I think it is thinking about the skill sets you'll need that you don't have already that you can bring in.
Yeah, I think it's, for me, the kind of title of the show is almost like asking a kind of, that kind of founding team to just stop and think first. Don't immediately default to what you think typically would guarantee success. It's kind of almost like, okay, well, there's as you said, there's a period of, or a process of kind of self-reflection there. So, kind of self-audit, what am I strong at? What am I, what are my growth areas? And then there's a bit around, kind of the sort of stuff that you do, which is that kind of design thinking workshop where you take that team through a process of what if scenarios in terms of aligned to their objectives, which is kind of like, it kind of makes them think a bit more further forward than just, we need this now. There's an opportunity loss if we don't get in a, chief of sales or something, or, it's kind of just try not to default to probably a traditional approach, and maybe take that time to kind of think about the next stages and phases. And the only way you can really do that, with the greatest respect, is to bring in individuals with that specialism, that insight, to either act as a kind of a consultative sounding board to help you map that, or to actually work with you and try and model that, so that actually you are thinking growth phase, so case in point, pre-seed, seed, runway to Series A, post-Series A, runway to Series B. And I think that would be really valuable. But coming back to that piece around kind of people debt, and you've seen that kind of accumulate. And how does that become what challenges does that generally kind of present founding teams or leadership teams? You touched upon it in terms of HR conversations, but I think it's probably a little bit broader than that.
I think so. Those early stages, your business is growing all of the time. And that sounds obvious, but it's growing, it's evolving, it's changing. And what it needs from people in that leadership team is going to grow, evolve, and change at the same time. And actually, I think we can sometimes get to the end of the 2 years, and at that point you're thinking, right, we need a head of in this team now. It's big enough, we need a head of, and I really want to reward this person who's worked really hard, as you said, you put them in a head of role. But then actually in a year's time, when that business has grown by X again, and that head of requirement is entirely different, you're then in a difficult position, because either you've continued to invest in that person and supported them in that role title, not just given them a title, or they have just continued doing the things the way they always have done so far, which is figure things out for myself and do the best and use my kind of natural potential and talent, but they don't have that experience to get them to that next stage. And then you have to say, oh, actually, like, we probably over promoted this person too quickly, or actually we need to bring somebody in with more experience, like I said. And then it kind of creates that what do we do with this person challenge, or we ignore it and actually the business suffers because we have a head of ops in an operations role that is probably, in the nicest possible way, a little bit out of their depth. So it is that the people debt that I'm talking about is over promoting people or too quickly promoting people, and then they don't have that space to grow. So they're suddenly in this title. If you're chief operations officer at the age of 28, where do you go next? And in the nicest possible way, COO at 28 in a business of 100 people is entirely different to CEO in a big company, international, whatever it might be. So it's making sure we don't, and I think somebody put it in the chat here, stop someone's development through over promoting them too early, and not actually giving them people to learn from in the business as well. And I think the other part of that is not creating roles for people. It's creating roles that the business needs, and if there are people in the business to fit them, great, but not just building your org structure and the business around the people you have, because that's never going to end well. It's got the best intentions behind it, but all too often it leads in a big challenge.
When you're meeting with new startup founders and new clients, do you actually build out an organogram for them? Do you let them know, like, okay, based on current state, here would be your hiring, given your projections and your targets on growth in 3 years, this is probably more what that looks like in 3 years. So, I mean, do you give them kind of that vision so that they make
Absolutely.
sure they don't over promote someone who they're going to have to demote then at that 3-year mark?
Yeah, and it is that is a really important part of it. And I think the key bit is thinking about that org chart, or whatever we want to call it, the structure, without people's names in it. So to strip out everybody that's there right now, if you look at roles, does this make sense? You've got a whatever it might be, 3 tech directors in a business of 30 people. Why? Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, let's strip it back, take the people out of it, take the emotion out, purely for the business objectives, the growth, whatever your investors have said you need to do, what actually is needed there. Quite often you see founders who have been fantastic in getting them to where they need to, and then there's investment, and it is, grow the business by going international, or grow the business by going into a new product range or a new area. And you take the founder that's done that and you say, okay, you're now, director of international or whatever, because that's the person that's there. But you're setting them up to fail, because just because you've done it in one market or one product area, that doesn't mean they can necessarily do it in another. So yes, to answer your question, helping them go through that kind of journey of, this is where we are today, what changes do we need to make, is super important. But people being able to take the current people out of the situation is super important. Kind of having that objective, right, where do we need to go? And I think there's one of the companies I worked for when I joined, and if they're listening, they won't mind me saying this, but the CEO sat down with me on the first day. I was like, look, I have no idea what you're here for. I literally don't know why we hired you. And he just said to me, I'll carry on running the business. You organise parties and whatever else it is that you're doing. I'm like, okay, this is my first venture into startup world. And he'll be laughing if he's listening. And a week later, I said to him, right, there isn't an org chart. You've got 100 people in the business. I don't know if you know you've got that many. There's not an org chart or anything. You've got 3 marketing directors at the moment. Did you know you have 3 doing the same role on, big salaries? And he's like, what? We've got 3 marketing directors. Like, yes, it probably isn't the best thing. So, it's funny. One of those where, that org chart people might be reluctant to, but it is a super important step just to kind of figure out what's happening.
100%. And I think within that as well, like, You take the names out and people are like, well, you're depersonalizing it. Well, not really. Actually, what you're doing is taking the objective step back, which then when you start to think about people, you can really think genuinely about career pathways. And that's one of the things I think, certainly startups and scale-ups struggle with. They have every best intention of growth. We want you to grow in your role. But actually we don't really know what that looks like yet. But we'll do it. Then they have to kind of almost retrospectively try and manage expectation, which can be really difficult because you've kind of almost sold the opportunity on that growth potential. Have you kind of seen that scenario play out before?
Yeah, definitely. And that is a challenge that we often face as well. And I think sorry, I'm not going to lie. I was also thinking about a football analogy at the same time as you were having that question, because if you know me, I always try and relate working and people to dating or football, and they never go brilliantly well. But I was thinking that point, that point around the org chart and kind of taking the people out of it. The most successful football coaches won't plan their strategy around one individual. There'll be great people in the team, but they're not going to build their whole season or their whole future around Ronaldo or whatever, because who knows what he's going to do next.
Exactly.
So and again, he has been oversold an opportunity coming back. He's been, his ego's been inflated. He's he's probably, the opportunity isn't living up to his expectations right now. But you can't just base everything around one person. You have to be flexible. You have to go with what challenges there are, both internally and externally at that point. So probably a terrible analogy, but sorry, that's where my head went.
I was just thinking, I don't know if you kind of lost Debbie on that one when you said football instead of soccer.
Yeah, then Ronaldo, isn't he soccer?
Thankfully, Ronaldo is pretty well known.
Should I change this?
Even people that don't know soccer know about that guy. I think you're right. I think and don't we all know what our strengths and our limitations are? Like if I find somehow that I'm the CHRO of a company that is 50 people, right? Well, I know that I'm not qualified to be the CHRO of Pepsi, right? I mean, you just know, don't you? So like when you get to a point where they're like, well, we actually have to hire a real CFO now. Don't you kind of know that all along you really weren't? You were doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But shoot,
I think
you're not really a CFO. Don't they know, Leah?
I think, unfortunately, self-awareness, exactly. You took the words out of my... I think it's self-awareness, and it's also strong people management. I think in the early stage of a business, and any stage, to be honest, but we can often reward efforts versus actual delivery or output. So it is, I know you are working all the hours to get this done. You have put your everything into this business for the last 3 years, but that shouldn't make up for the fact that they actually can't do what is required of them anymore. Or that
they don't know how to do.
Absolutely.
Next step.
And by not addressing that, we're not setting them up for success. We're not setting the business up for success. And then I think that self-awareness of, I'm not the right person anymore can get lost. That perspective of, yes, you know everything about X business in terms of the history and the way the weird quirks in this system are set up as a workaround or whatever. But that doesn't mean you are operating at the level that you think you are, because the feedback you've been given for so long is inflated. So I think that self-awareness point is really key. And I think to that point, for anyone working in small businesses, keeping in a close network of people who are in the same field as you, that you can kind of keep learning from, who you keep that perspective and realize you don't know everything. And that there's, for example, right now, like learning Australia and the US as a market, two massive markets that are completely different to the UK. And you think, gosh, like, how does a global CPO of, I don't know, whatever company, Pepsi, manage all of these areas? And it's reminding yourself that there is so much you don't know yet, even though if you know everything about that company.
And I think that's why even maybe having those conversations during onboarding, right? Like, okay, we're bringing you in today. Today, you know that we're only like 3 people, right? And here's where we're going to be. Here's where we're hoping we're going to be in 3 years, and mapping that out. Like at this point, we're probably going to have to hire a real CFO, Rachel, because, like you only went to community college and got your associates in finance. Like, you've only done this for a few years. And while you have expertise we can use today, when we get to this point, we're probably going to have to hire a CFO who knows ... And Rachel at that point is like, I guess I don't really know that. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're setting this and reward, because I do believe meritocracy is important. That's good for everybody. It's good for current employees to see that this person just got promoted because she's always kicking ass. That's good. But doing that and always reminding people that, we're going to work with your potential and we'll train you up. And then when we bring in the CFO, you're going to have an opportunity to learn under someone who can teach you. I mean, and presenting it as an opportunity instead of like, well, at this point, we're going to have to demote you then because you're not really qualified. Right?
So don't give them the title in the first place.
Like you're planting the seeds so no one's disappointed later, and you don't have those bodies in the way. What did you call it? People
debt, as it were.
People debt. You don't have the people debt, and they knew it was coming, right? But like, that doesn't probably make it easier when it's there.
I think there's an interesting contrast, because obviously we're talking about startups and scale-ups, and that journey you can kind of understand. I don't know whether you've experienced kind of, Leah, kind of individuals that are kind of at C-suite level in an existing corporate that have perhaps, kind of just gone through that journey in that particular business. How, ultimately, how do you look to either replace or upskill those type of individuals? Because ultimately they may have this wealth of business knowledge in terms of the particular business they're in, but actually, so that's almost their horizontal kind of like knowledge. But in terms of vertical, are they actually progressing the business in their role as a kind of C-suite? Have you kind of encountered that at all?
In the bigger corporates, you mean, as opposed to?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, bigger corporates. Yeah,
definitely. There's definitely one industry has lost you.
No, you're back.
Oh,
you're
am I
back.
back?
You're back.
You're back.
Okay.
You're back. Yeah.
Sorry, I think I froze there. There's definitely industries where people, have a 20-year career in that same business, and they work their way up. And I think, again, developing potential, developing talent is so important. But to every business is going to evolve, every business is going to change, every market is. And so I think it is, again, not over promoting those people and rewarding them on length of service, actually thinking, okay, what do we need right now? And, are there outside skill sets or experience, whatever, that's going to come in and help us do this? And if I think of one of the businesses that I worked for, it was a 900 people company across 7 different sites. And the leadership team there were that kind of homegrown, had been in the industry for a long time, and were known as very nice. It was a nice leadership team. Like, they were lovely and culturally fantastic, but sometimes things didn't happen as quickly as we needed them to. And probably those kind of, that high performance wasn't driven because, well done for doing your job, as opposed to, great, you've done your job, but I want to see the next step. And they brought in 2 directors from the banking world, who the first time I met them,
slight loss of connection there.
Like,
sure.
Honestly, I was like, wow, this is a culture shock. Like, sorry.
You're back.
Am I back?
You're back. Yeah, you're back. Yeah. Yeah, you are. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Anyway, it was a culture shock, but they brought in, we needed that. And we needed it to shake things up. And we needed that slight ruthlessness. And I like to think of it as kind of like the warmth and the edge. You need that right balance in a business between the warmth and the edge, or the support and the challenge. And, in that case, they needed some external people to come in and bring that. So I think it is, we're talking about scale ups, but it is something that happens still in corporates and bigger businesses. And there's a really good book. I'd recommend the audio, called Talent Masters. And it's talking about in big companies having, 5 or 6 successors for each role. So that at the point where that role becomes available, what is the skill set you need for it? Because at any given time, it's going to be slightly different. So you don't just have one person, you have kind of 6 different people that might be right at the right time. Including external people.
And that creates a bit more of an opportunity for people internally, but equally gives the kind of leadership team a bit more choice, which is always a good position to be in, right? As long as you're kind of transparent about that particular process. I wanted to change tack slightly because obviously in the green room we saw the backdrop of where you are at the moment in kind of Tenerife. But there is a story behind this, which I think is quite interesting, around you choosing to want to still fulfill your role and build a business, but not be fixed in terms of location. And I was keen to know kind of what your experiences has been of that so far. And equally, if there's founders, co-founders, leadership teams thinking, oh, right, okay, we've got to start thinking about a really distributed team and people want to work from different countries and all that sort of thing, your personal experience and then what your advice would be in terms of how they could potentially start to structure that,
Tax evasion, no, I am definitely in the UK 6 months a year, making sure I'm paying the right tax there. But that is a good point to bring up. And I think the first point there is, again, every business is different, and what every business will need is slightly different. So at the moment, we are changing things up. We're not in the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 in the way that we used to be. And people do want increased flexibility. But at the same time, a business has to think about where will the work be done most productively for that business. What kind of business is it? If it's one of the businesses I work for at the moment is in the fashion industry, and their product development team, being in person to feel, look, see the product is super important. So first things first, what works for you and what works for a business. I think secondly, tax evasion, knowing where we're going to employ that person, where are they actually based. There's companies like Remote who help out with things like that can help you employ people around the world, which will become more and more popular. JustWorks is one that we are using in America at the moment, who are incredible. But knowing kind of from a HR perspective what you need to be aware of. My decision was definitely I've done 10 years plus in the office every day, giving my everything, and just kind of wanted to shake it up a little bit. I think things to be aware of isn't, you're not on holiday, despite what people say, despite what it looks like. It's lovely and sunny, but I'm in the shade trying to stop my iPad overheating. It's on you to deliver. You can't just go to work and be in the office and therefore you've done a good day of work. You've got to show up, you've got to deliver. And if you want to learn from others, you need to find a way to do that isn't just overhearing in the kind of working environment. So to be honest, it's probably not something I'll do forever, and I miss going into the office. Who doesn't? That team environment. But I do think and would encourage companies to think about a nomad policy or whatever that is. So 1 month a year, up to 1 month a year, people can work from wherever, because that is the flexibility that people want. With some criteria around it. Internet has to be good. Realize mine just dropped out, so apologies for that.
But it's a personality type though too, don't you think, Leah? I mean, to work in startup, I mean, you can't hide. You have to be a driver. You have to be, if you're working 40 hours a week, people think you are a slacker. Like you're not, there's no work-life balance. And I think making sure that the people that you hire know that up front, that like this is grind culture right now.
Yeah.
And warning them, because that wanting to hire your friend and we'll have so much fun, and maybe for the Christmas party we'll go to Chicago, and people forget about the fact that like it's grind. Everyone's wearing 15 different hats here.
Absolutely. And I think the people that love startups don't mind that. They love that. That's in their nature.
Thrive on it. Yeah.
Yeah. They're like, but they also, that give take of, yeah, I'm going to give that. And if something needs to be done until 3 a.m., I'll do that. But at the same time, I'm not going to be questioned if I'm not in work until 11 because I've gone to, have a dentist appointment or whatever it is. Like that flexibility around hours, where you are, kind of the trust, and it comes back to trust. Trust you'll deliver. 100%. Trust where you are. And then as long as you're delivering that output and that grind is there,
who cares where you want to be?
Yeah, exactly.
I really like that idea of kind of offering that kind of flexibility from a month, a year to kind of work from a different location, because I think it's something you can kind of, I mean, ultimately you're not really going to pay for that person to do that, so it's kind of on them to sort the logistics. But equally, it's almost like it's almost a benefit and a show of trust and flexibility that ultimately, from a business perspective, doesn't really cost you anything, right? I mean, it's kind of like if that person wants to work from kind of Tenerife or Portugal or kind of wherever, it's something that they want to do. It's a life goal, if you will. And if you can facilitate that and still kind of get the output and the delivery, then to your point, does it really matter whether it's done between kind of 11 and 7 or 8 and 4 or whatever, or big 2-hour gap in the middle? As long as they're kind of prioritizing what they need to then and showing up, I think it's a really lovely kind of thing to do. And equally as well, and to your point, right, whilst you've enjoyed kind of working for Tenerife and many other locations over the last 12 months, it does actually make you appreciate as well that kind of in-office time, and maybe makes you think about how you want to spend that when you're there, and not that whole kind of presenteeism of just being there. It's kind of like, actually, I'm going in for these specific reasons, which I think can actually really add to the kind of culture and their environment, which is something that so many companies talk about, right? And ultimately, so many struggle with trying to get that right. And this is kind of my big curveball question for you is like, in all your experience in terms of kind of people, environments, different founders, co-founders, businesses, are there any a couple, 2, 3 things that you when they start to think about culture and building a culture, you would advise them to think about first before they go, this is our culture?
That is a curveball question, and I like it. But I'm just, before I jump straight in, which is my natural reaction, I'm pausing for a second to think, okay, what is this? I think the biggest thing is quite often people can get really excited, and culture is doing the trip to Chicago, and it's the, back to my dating analogy, it's the initial things that attract you to someone. It's height, it's their profile picture, it's whatever, it's the things that stand out on, and almost the superficial once you get there. So when you're thinking about culture, it's not retreats, it's not just retreats, it's not just the shiny things that look great, but it's actually, how do you work as a company? What's your way? What do you value? What are your principles? And really thinking about those, because when you're a founder and there's 10 of you, you probably all share that. It's just given that's kind of what the culture is. But actually, the more people you hire in, the more people you're bringing into that challenge it and shake things up. And if you're not living by example and kind of really how you want to create things, and managing that carefully in your business, it will become toxic. Like it will spiral. And you know, no matter, back to somewhere I worked, had £1 million a year to spend on 100 employees for employee engagement. It was the worst place, worst culture they've ever worked
Really?
in. No amount of bonus, Christmas party, you know, £5,000 behind the pub on a Thursday could make up for the lack of people management, for people not trusting, for people not empowering those in those teams. You know, so I think first tip, culture isn't just the shiny, fluffy, you know, stuff. It is the core of your ethos, how you work. What else would I say on culture? I think the second thing is read the book Belonging. It's very, very good. It's around kind of storytelling and traditions and how all of that builds into a culture. And they reference the All Blacks to say the rugby team, that when you start playing for them, you're told on day one, you're inducted into their history and their ethos and everything. And they say to you, your key role here is to leave this team and your position in that shirt being in a better place than it was when you started. So you've inherited this. Not anyone gets to play in this position. You have to leave it in a better place than when you started. So read that book.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I think they're probably my two things.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's kind of giving me goosebumps. That kind of like you're kind of almost the steward and the kind of shepherd of that particular role. And it's your duty, which is a great analogy, right? It's your duty to kind of move on from that role and leave it in a better place, so that somebody is going to come into that. You have to accept that is not going to be your role forever. No. If you're thinking practically and you're really thinking about the people in the business, you're thinking, when do I move on from this? What's my, you know, my kind of my exit, and what does that mean for people coming through the business and their journey? I think is very, very cool.
Well, in New Zealand, their tradition runs deep.
Really does.
It is. So that is a responsibility for someone to put on your shoulder. Like, you don't just have a job now, you have to continue on this legacy.
Yeah.
You know, but I think when you're presented with the responsibility in that light, then it feels a little more sacred, right? It feels a little bit more important. So I like it. Good vision.
I think it's a bit more precious as well, right? You approach it in a very different way. If you're sort of saying somebody, you have a, you know, kind of a responsibility to grow this role and evolve it, and then your responsibility is to move on from it, and allow somebody else to continue their journey. I wonder how easy that would be to implement into, you know, a kind of rapidly growing startup or scale up that their main mission is IPO or acquisition.
And it depends on the person, because a lot of people just view employment in a very transactional light. I mean, that's just, and they are not going to be the ones that carry a startup through.
Yeah, exactly.
Punch in, punch out, and I am not thinking about work until Monday morning again. Like, that's not who's going to grow your startup.
No.
You know, and you're looking at 75% of startups fail, right?
Yeah.
So you need a winning team.
100%. So I'm just kind of conscious of maybe one final kind of question, Leah, before we kind of come back to wrap up. And on that subject of culture, what do you think of kind of companies that started to define their values when they're a lot larger? So it's like, okay, we're 100 people now. We need to define what our culture is. I kind of find that retrospective, trying to define what it is, even though it's grown already in an organic way, probably quite challenging. So I'd imagine there's probably a point in that kind of initial growth stage where if you can articulate your own values and maybe use them as an initial guide, that could potentially work, as opposed to, you know, trying to do a massive project on values or redefining values and you're 150 people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And it is hard. I've done it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
at that point, and it's harder to do. But I think a way of thinking about values, because sometimes they're just seen, that word value just has a bit of a tick in the box, or poster on the wall, when some people can roll their eyes and go, no, we don't need that, we know it. But it is, what are the principles, what's that ethos, what's that way of working? And if you can get that figured out early on, by defining that and by getting it on paper, you will attract the people that will thrive in your company. So that sense of belonging that we've just talked about, actually, that for me is culture. Joining somewhere where you feel that you can be yourself, that you really can be yourself, there's room to grow, you buy into the way things are done, you don't have to explain yourself every 2 minutes, you trust in the other people because they share the same outlook as you. It doesn't mean you're all the same, but you have the same principles, values, whatever. And so by defining those early on, it's not a tick in the box, but it is okay, how do we make sure that comes across in everything that we put out to potential employees? How do we make sure that we're recruiting against those? So not just what someone can do, but how they can do it. Chief people officers, people, not everyone is going to be the right match for every business, because I'm not everyone's cup of tea, definitely not. But it's about finding that place where you belong, and actually defining those values early on. The earlier you can do it, the easier that is to embed them into everything.
That's incredible. And what a lovely way to kind of wrap up the show. Leah, I mean, you've dropped some amazing knowledge during the course of this last 56, almost 57 minutes, right? It's incredible. So tell everybody where they can connect with you if they want more time with Leah Ellis. Where can we find you? We'll drop all this onto the kind of social, but what's the main channel if they want to kind of contact you and be like, hey, let's continue the conversation?
Tenerife South, Costa Day. Come out here.
I'm coming.
27 degrees. LinkedIn, probably the best way. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn. It's just Leah Ellis. I think the link is in this channel.
It is.
If you want to email me as well, feel free to. It's leah@wearecandid.co. I will share that with Glenn afterwards if you didn't get that. leah@wearecandid.co. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best bet. Feel free to message me. I will get back to you. Normally, there we go, quite quickly. But feel free to send any questions, any things that you didn't agree with. Let me know. Be happy to talk them through. Be good to hear.
100%. And you may well be seeing Leah coming up on Nevermind the Job Search podcast soon, and we're trying to convince her to join us on the first Hear the People live show. But we'll see if she's in the UK at that time. We'll see. But Leah, thank you so much for being our guest today. You've been amazing.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. Very
cool. And to my glamorous guest co-host, Debi Easterday, thank you so much for joining me this week. Really appreciate it.
Yes, of course.
And Debi will be joining me again in 2 weeks' time when we're speaking to Maya Huber. Some more details coming in the social in relation to that. Really looking forward to it. But from sunny Tenerife, very rainy Suffolk. And what's the weather like with you, Debi?
Almost always miserable in Indiana.
Well, listen, everyone, have a really fantastic week. Leah, you've been amazing. Debi, you're awesome. And we will catch up with everybody in 2 weeks' time. Have a good one, folks.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
it easy.
Bye.